All right, so what we have here is a 8-speed automatic transmission out of roughly a 2018 Corvette. It's a GM 8L90 transmission. So we're going to go through some end plate measurements on this unit. The end plate measurement can be a little complicated, especially if you've never taken the end plate measurement before. So why is it important to measure end plate? Well, overhauling a number of these units out in the field, I can tell you that customers will come in and they would, especially in the early years of the 8-speeds. You guys out there who worked on these, this unit came out in 2014 in the Corvette, but went out into other vehicles out there in 2015. If you had a early 8-speed, especially 2015, man, it was a nightmare. The customer complaints about how these transmissions shifted was, I mean, it consumed most of my day every day when I was still in the shop. Put it in reverse or put it in drive and the thing would clunk and bang into gear, and the customers would just scream and yell about it, especially Cadillac owners, Cadillac Escalade owners would just scream and yell about this. So if you had a harsh engagement from park into reverse or from reverse into drive, park into drive, that could be an excessive end play issue. And the specification on this unit, whether it's a Corvette or a truck, it doesn't matter. The spec on this unit is pretty broad range. It's 8 thousandths to 31 thousandths of an inch. Well, if I've got 30 thousandths end play, okay, yeah, technically it's in spec, but I have to take up 30 thousandths worth of space when I put this thing into gear, and it's going to slam into gear. And the customers are going to complain about it. And of course, you can tell them all day long it's normal, no worries, but they'll continue to come back and they'll be pretty upset, that their $90,000 Escalade bumps when it goes into gear. Corvette or whatever. Corvette owners probably a little bit worse sometimes. And we'll talk in a minute about why the Corvettes and the Camaros with the 8-speeds didn't have all the problems that the trucks and the SUVs did. But let's go through this end play process so you kind of see what the procedure's like. And I highly recommend measuring end play on these units. If you're overhauling these units and you want to take good care of your customer and make sure it has that nice smooth shift and nice smooth gear engagement, there's a lot of things that you can do to fix those issues with these transmissions. The transmission control module is only going to be able to learn up to a certain extent as to how to compensate for clearances and travels in the clutches and clearances and travels within that total end play of this unit. And we'll have some more videos coming out about the demonstrating how you actually measure the clutch travels in this unit. Because this 8-speed, there's a lot of measuring to it. A lot. It's very tedious, but it will greatly improve the shift quality of the transmission. That I can tell you for sure, having experienced it myself overhauling these out in the field. So we're going to start with step one. You have to install a puller bar and a bearing or a washer on this output shaft of this unit. So we're going to do that first. So I have my bearing. I'm going to put on the output shaft. This keeps the output shaft from turning when I apply pressure to this here in just a bit. Your puller bar, and you can see I got some long threaded rods that go with this. And they tell you, in the manufacturer's information, they tell you that these rods need to be 16 inches in length. They don't necessarily need to be that long for a truck application, but you can see the length of this output shaft on this Corvette application. In this case, they do need to be that long. And you have to make those yourself. That's not a special service tool that you can just go buy. I actually look up the all thread on Amazon, 10 millimeter diameter by 1.5 millimeter thread is what is required. And you have to remove 2 of your extension housing bolts here and thread it into these holes and get it set up on this output shaft on this unit. It's a 10 millimeter by 1.5 all thread. Of course, you're going to need some 10 millimeter nuts and some fender washers here to get all this set up. I've actually spent a lot of time looking around on Craigslist and eBay, buying all my own personal 8-speed tools for my kit that I use when I'm overhauling these. And, if you're buying these tools from the manufacturer, they are ridiculously expensive. Ridiculously expensive. You can save yourself a lot of money. Not in every case. I mean, some of these tools are actually going to be hard to find, but I have found a lot of them on Craigslist and eBay for a quarter of the cost of what the manufacturer wants for the tools new. You know, especially it comes with to the seal sizers and the seal installers for this unit. So we're going to talk about all that later in videos down the road. Today we're just talking about the end play. So I've got this set up on the output shaft. So let's we're going to roll this transmission over. Now we need to set up some tools on the front of this unit. So you actually have to set up tools on the back of the unit and the front of the unit, and you're going to compress this thing to get your overall end play measurement. So the next tool you're going to need is a compressor bridge. So I'm getting that set up now. So we're going to take this compressor bridge. It's an old tool, it's been around for a long time. It was used on the 6T series transmissions back in the day and probably some others. We're going to get this set up on the front of this transmission on the torque converter side of this unit. Now you'll notice that we've got some more threaded rods here. So these, in the manufacturer's information, they tell you to use 5/16 by 18. Honestly, it really doesn't matter what kind of threaded rod you use here. I went to the local hardware store and bought some 5/16 all thread and cut it to the 16-inch lengths that they were specifying in their information, and just, you know, some 5/16 by 18 nuts and some 5/16 washers to get all this set up. Again, you got to source all that stuff yourself. Not something that you can buy. You can usually find these in like a 12-inch pre-cut length, but if you need them 16 inches long, just buy a piece of all thread. You can get the 5/16 all thread 36-inch lengths and just, you know, cut them down to two 16-inch sections. So I've got this set up. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten this up just a little bit so it's not moving on me. Then we're gonna bring out another tool that we're gonna need to work with this measurement, so we can get this measurement, you know, taken successfully. So I'm gonna tighten this up to the torque converter housing. Get this centered up over my input shaft, because there's another tool I'm gonna put in place right here so I can put some pressure on this input shaft on this unit. Now, the next tool that they call out is a load cell gauge. This load cell gauge is made by, and you can probably see it right there on the screen, it's made by Proform. If you go to Proform Tools, just search it, just Google search Proform Tools. You can buy these in a lot of places. This particular one, they make several different versions of these, even some digital ones, which I don't recommend. This particular one, it's actually a valve spring tester. But for all of the measurements in the 8-speed, you have to put a certain amount of pressure on each clutch pack when you're measuring it, and on this input shaft when you're measuring it. So we need something to take that measurement for us. So this is the tool that's specified by the manufacturer to take this measurement. Now you got to be careful with these. If you buy one maybe that's not a Proform, or if you buy one of the nice digital ones, one of the measurements you have to take inside of this transmission for one of the holding clutches down here in the bottom of the transmission case, the size of the gauge is going to matter because there's limited room inside the transmission case to take that measurement. So some of the gauges that you might find online for 20, 30 bucks may not fit. This particular Proform gauge, about the cheapest I have found it, is $100. You can actually order these from Summit Racing. So we're going to set this up on the input shaft. I'm going to position it where I'm in close proximity to this post that we have threaded into the torque converter housing. Now you do not need one of these. This is an old 4-speed tool. You could actually just put another piece of all thread here for this next measurement we're going to take, or I can use one of these existing pieces of all thread on this compressor bridge, and we'll demonstrate that. All right, so I need to put 50 pounds of pressure on this input shaft. So I'm going to dial this up to 50 psi. This is all coming directly from the manufacturer's information. So we have 50 pounds of pressure on this input shaft. My next step is to take a dial indicator. I'm going to attach it here, and we're going to get a measurement off the face of this valve spring testing tool here. You might be asking yourself the question, why did they decide to use that tool? Talking about this ProForm tool and not another tool that's available on the market? I don't know. That's a good question. I would imagine that hydromatics engineers probably tested multiple tools, and this was the one that they found that worked the best for this application. Okay, so I'm setting up my dial indicator to measure off the face of this gauge. You always want to put at least half a turn of preload on your dial indicator. I actually usually put a little bit more because I got quite a bit of movement here to work with. So we got 50 pounds of pressure on my gauge. That's going directly, 50 pounds of pressure directly to my input shaft on this transmission. I got my dial indicator set up on the face of this valve spring tester tool. Now I'm going to zero out my dial indicator. Now for the next step, that puller bar that we put on the output shaft of this transmission, we have to torque that to 90 inch-pounds. Now, I want to bring up something that's very important. When I had this transmission turned upside down and I put that puller bar on there, you need to leave it loose where the forcing screw pushes on the output shaft of this unit. I'll bring this back up when we get finished taking this measurement, show you what I'm talking about. But I had this transmission mounted upside down in a transmission holding fixture. It may not always be the case, at the shop. If I put that puller bar on there and I turned that forcing screw on that puller bar all the way down to where it made contact with that output shaft and did not leave it loose, did not leave a gap in it, when I turned this transmission back over, all the weight of the internal components of this transmission push down on that output shaft, and it applies too much load to that output shaft. So when I take that next step and I torque that forcing screw to 90 inch-pounds, I may already have this transmission preloaded a little bit, and I'm not going to get the correct reading here. That is very important. The manufacturer's instructions do not always do the greatest job of explaining that. It says loosely tighten. Well, to me, that means just run it up until it touches the output shaft, not leave it completely loose where there's a little bit of a gap there. So if I'm following their directions and I loosely tighten it and it's touching the output shaft and I flip this transmission over the way I did earlier, I just preloaded that output shaft and my in-play measurement's not going to come out correctly. So we're going to do that step now. We're going to torque this 90 inch-pounds, and we'll look and see what we got here on our dial indicator for the in-play measurement on this unit. All right, I'm going to take my old school torque wrench here. I know most of you guys out there now probably have those real nice digital torque wrenches with the angle meters built into them and all that stuff. Those are great. I don't always trust them because I don't always know if they're calibrated correctly. But they are nice. I'm not saying they're not. They're good to have around. Okay, so we're going to take that next step. We're going to torque this 90 inch-pounds. So while I'm torquing that puller bar to the output shaft at 90 inch-pounds, watch that dial indicator. You should see it moving. And if you can hear this, I got this completely loose down here. I've got a gap here, so I was not touching the output shaft. So now I'm going to turn this forcing screw by hand until I'm touching my output shaft. And we're going to take that measurement. We torque this to the 90 inch-pounds. Okay, so we're at 90 inch-pounds. And looking at my dial indicator, you did see some movement there. I'll bring this in a little bit closer so you can see it, hopefully. We have 25, almost 26 thousandths in play in this unit. So 26 thousandths in play technically is in spec, right? 8 thousandths to 31 thousandths is the spec on this unit. Always remember to take the torque off your torque wrench before you put it away, by the way, because they will get out of calibration if they stay rotated where they're tight all the time. So the reason, personally, I learned some hard lessons out in the field working on these. I got to the point where I started checking endplay as soon as the unit came out. So if you're following the manufacturer's instructions, your endplay measurement's the last thing you do before you put it back in the vehicle. Well, let's say I did overhaul this unit and I had some burn clutches in it. Maybe I had a stuck valve in the valve body and I got all that corrected, got it all back together. And then I measured endplay and I see it's 26 thousandths like it is here. And now what I'm gonna have to do, because I don't want 26 thousandths endplay, I think that's way too much. I want to try to bring it down closer to that 8 thousandths, to that bottom of the line. You know, maybe I can get it to 10 to 12 thousandths endplay. It's going to engage from park into reverse or drive a lot smoother because there's a lot less space to take up. But at that point, if I've already overhauled this unit, well, now I'm gonna have to take this front cover back off because I'm gonna have to replace that shim in there to take some of this 26 thousandths out of it. So now I just went back on hold for parts because I guarantee you my parts department doesn't have the shim I need in stock. I know most of y'all run into that before. And I might be down another 2 or 3 days, plus taking this thing back apart and possibly risking tearing my little paper gasket in here when I do that, and then I'm gonna need a new one. I will tell you from experience, and if you're going through these 8 speeds, and especially if you have all the tools to take all the measurements, I started learning to take the endplay measurement when I take the unit out. Then when I get down to my initial first steps of disassembly here, I'm gonna measure that shim and I'm gonna write down what it is and I'm gonna go order another one. I'm gonna put it on my parts list automatically. And I actually learned, and you'll see in some later videos, we'll talk about this a little bit more, I actually learned to measure every clutch pack travel as it comes out before I tear them down and look for any damage and make a note of that, because with the exception of one clutch in this unit, they're adjustable. They have selectable snap rings to take travel out of the clutches. And excessive clutch travel in this unit will also cause some real sloppy shifts. And most of your customers are not going to be okay with that, especially if it's an Escalade owner. They're not going to be okay with that. We didn't have as many issues with shift quality in the Camaros and the Corvettes. And the reason why is because the transmission control module tuning for these units were completely different because it was a performance application. So they tended to shift a lot better. But, you know, especially you took like a 15 model half-ton truck with an 8-speed in it, that first year they put them in the trucks, they sucked. They were terrible. I wouldn't have owned one. I could see why the customers were mad every time they came in when they bought maybe a $75,000 GMC Denali half-ton truck and they put it in reverse and 3 seconds later it slams in the gear and chirps the rear tires. Yeah, they're gonna be pissed off when they come in. So you gotta watch out for that kind of stuff. You can improve the shift quality of these greatly. I'm gonna roll this back over and I'm gonna show you what I was talking about when they say loosely tighten in the manufacturer's instructions versus leaving it loose. And then we'll just keep an eye out on the channel for some more videos coming out later going over some of the internal measurements of this unit. So let me demonstrate what we were talking about here. So turn this transmission slightly here so you can get a better look at this. So you can see the puller bar, the forcing screw on the puller bar is contacting my bearing and my output shaft. In the manufacturer's instructions, when you set this up, it says loosely tighten. So my version of loosely tighten is to run this down by hand until it stops. To me, it's still loose, right? Loosely tighten. That's too tight. If I roll this back over, and the internal weight of this transmission pushes on this output shaft, it's going to preload this transmission. And your in-play measurement will not be right. I promise you. Your in-play measurement will not be right. It'll be too low. And you can miscalculate some adjustments that need to be made on this unit to make it shift better where it's more pleasing to the customer. So just some things to look out for. I would say out of my experience with GM transmissions, and we'll just go from 6-speed on up to current, which is 10-speed. Realistically, I think this one has the most tedious time-consuming measurements is the 8-speed. Once we got into the 10 speeds and those started coming out, shift quality was greatly improved over the 8-speed, which made the customers very happy. But the 8 speeds, they're unique. It's a great transmission. It's built very well. It's extremely tough. It'll handle a lot of horsepower for the performance guys out there, and there's a lot of aftermarket parts available for these now. But on the other side of the house, on these stock units, especially in the trucks and the SUVs, they had sloppy shifts, but there are ways to fix that. And customers, you can fix it and make it better for the customer. Some customers you may not make happy, but a lot of them you can. So hope this helps out.